Stoker was an Irish writer from the late 19th century. He wrote quite a lot of novels in his career, and also quite a lot of short stories. He was very popular with the kind of gothic horror writers and other crime writers at the time to write short stories, get them published in magazines. So people like Robert Louis Stevenson and Arthur Conan Doyle wrote quite a lot of short stories, and so did he. His most famous novel, of course, is Dracula, which is absolutely fantastic. I've read quite a few other novels and short stories by Bram Stoker, and personally I'm not a huge fan. I don't think he's very consistent, and it's interesting because Dracula really is great. It's funny that, well, I guess it's not funny, but it's a shame that he never managed to encapsulate that success with another novel. One particular one that people talk about a lot is The Lair of the White Worm, which is absolutely dreadful. It's possibly one of the worst books I've ever read. I very much steer somebody against that. He also wrote The Jewel of the Seven Stars, which is sort of it's quite interesting. It's a relatively good story, but it's just nothing like Dracula. Dracula's a strange one. It's an epistolary novel, which means it's basically like a collection of documents that tell you a story. So it's diary entries, journal entries, phonograph recordings, lots of different things like that that lead the story along. And it's actually done really, really well. Before I read it, because I already knew about the style, I was really worried that that kind of style of having stories, having a story written with different bits of information just wouldn't work. It definitely works. You're completely taken up with it, you flow with the story, you get really excited when somebody's narrative stops because of the plot. You're really excited to find out when it's going to start again, or you find from another character what that character's point of view is and why that character stopped writing their journal. The beginning, the first half I'd say, is the best, and that's where you meet Dracula. The kind of the tension builds, the suspense builds. There's loads of mythology that is a total mine for modern fiction. For some reason, you'd be surprised how many things you'll find when you read the book haven't been brought out in movies and TV shows, stuff like that. So there's things like the brides of Dracula. He makes a reference in here quite clearly to who they're supposed to be. When Harker and Dracula are sat down at the beginning to discuss Dracula's family history, obviously he's talking about himself, he goes into loads of detail about from Vlad the Impaler all the way through to himself, which is absolutely fascinating. There's a few other kind of supernatural elements going on which are never really talked about in sort of other modern fiction or spin-off fiction, but they're brilliant. So when you get back to England in the novel and we meet the heroes, personally I think the story starts to go a little bit downhill. The only reason why is I'd say from about halfway to maybe 3/4 of the way through, the story kind of goes nowhere. Van Helsing enters, and Van Helsing is amazing. He's a very cool character, but he's really over the top affectionate, and there's way too much in there of him going on about how much he loves everybody and how much everybody should just love everybody else. And when you first kind of read a few lines of it, you're immediately like Van Helsing for it, because you think, oh, he's just a really nice old guy. But when he keeps going on and on and on about it, it can become a bit of a drag. So you're just waiting for that point, which is about 3/4 of the way through, where they finally turn the heads on Dracula and start chasing him back. And then the ending is just amazing. It's just a race to the end. It's high tension, well constructed, and it's just a fantastic novel for that. So definitely worth reading. If you think you know the story but you've never read it, read it. I would definitely recommend it. I actually began by reading Dracula's Guest, and there's a bit of controversy about Dracula's Guest. It's a short story that Bram Stoker wrote, and it was found amongst his papers after he died. So there's this whole question of whether it was supposed to be part of Dracula or not. The only thing that references Dracula is right at the very end. There's a mention of the name Dracula in the story. So, and it's about essentially Harker on his way to Dracula's castle, and he has another adventure involving a vampire. So some people say that it was just an early draft idea and that's why you never published it. Other people say it is supposed to be in there and somebody else took it out. Does it matter? I don't personally think so. I read the thing before I read Dracula, and I don't think it changed the way I saw Dracula at all. It's only a short story. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? It's actually a pretty good short story, and I'm really glad that I read it first. So, personally, I'd say do read Dracula's Guest first, and don't worry too much about why he wrote it or what it was meant for.